Hello, in this video we're going to discuss how God survived, and this is going to lead to the creation of planets and stars. So how God survived and made discoveries, part 1. Now, as mentioned in how God was created, it was a natural phenomenon where there's a dimension that's bigger than this universe, where a cluster of asteroids that consisted of wormhole element were pulled together by a single fragment of gravity element. The gravity element's gravity field pulled them together, and it formed a naturally sealed sphere-shaped chamber, and inside that chamber the gravity element contacted one side of it on the inside, producing a wormhole exit point that filled the chamber full of air. Then a second reaction occurred where the gravity element fragment touched something else and emitted gravity at the same time. This would be because of the polarity of the gravity element at the time. So it touched and injected gravity element into the wormhole element, and this, because of the configuration of the chamber, produced a reaction where a wormhole exit point formed, emitting soul material that knitted together, that went around the gravity element fragment, which produced a soul form of a man that filled with a body. So this process of creation took 8 hours. And so inside that chamber there's zero gravity, there's air. Outside there's vacuum, there's no light at all. So events that occurred inside that chamber, for an astronaut it's certain doom. For anyone it's certain doom. So we're going to go through this in a way so that people can understand how God survived, and then how God made planets and stars. So it's going to be many parts to this, and we'll work our way towards it to the point where people can see how the planets were formed, including the weather system and the moons. So inside this chamber God cried out, and his first words were, God, God, God. So that's how God got his name, as those were his first words, and he kept that word, and that is what he's called by, and nothing else. So we do not call God Yahweh or Jehovah or anything else. It's just God. Okay? And so that's how God got his name. Then inside that chamber, it's dark, he ran out of air and died of asphyxiation. So from there the soul detached from the body and was floating around in there. Now just remember that God still has the fragment of gravity element inside his soul's skull. And so floating around, he wondered what to do. So he tried touching the side of the chamber at one point, and it produced the same wormhole exit point that had formed earlier, caused by the gravity element fragment. And this produced a wormhole exit point that emitted air, and it filled the chamber with air, and then it turned itself off after God released his finger from that point. If he had left it on, it would have overpressurized, become uncomfortable, and then God would have died eventually from it. So touching the wall at that location filled the chamber with air. God touched the wall at a different location, and a black ball, which is a wormhole, formed inside God's stomach. and emitted a goo, refilling his soul with a new body. So it's a bit difficult for people to understand or grasp, but the soul is the template for the body. And what happens is this process produced a wormhole exit point inside the soul, which filled the soul with a new body. We'll refer to this process as refilling from now on, because it is something that occurs with all life. When they die, they get refilled. Okay? Once they get to heaven, that's what happens. If you wind up in the storage dimension, you do not get refilled. You just remain in soul state. The soul is 0.005 of a gram in weight. It's very, very light. And we'll discuss later how Satan and his followers on earth are in soul form and are actually way less than that. Alright, so God played with the wall. Now, what we're going to talk about is gravity intensity. So God can emit gravity from his hands, and we refer to this as happiness. Okay, so he refers to this as happiness. So he becomes more happy, means more gravity emitted from his hands. So he played with the wall and produced another black ball. This one was a wormhole entry point, and it had an exit point outside the asteroid of which God was inside of. Now this asteroid is quite massive. So I said it is a cluster of asteroids that were pulled together, and there was interdimensional matter diffusion transfer involved in this process, which is why the inside of the chamber was sphere shaped, because it had been cut by a wormhole. The gravity element had produced that. So it's quite a massive asteroid. And so upon getting outside, what God did was he floated around and then found through experimentation that he could propel himself slowly by using his hands. So he emits gravity throughout his entire body, but with his hands he could direct the gravity in different directions. So you imagine that God is floating around in space in zero gravity, and he puts his palms facing in front of him. That would push him backwards. He becomes more happy. It pushes him backwards a little bit faster. Being zero gravity, he can keep making himself go a little bit faster each time. But then, if he wants to turn around, he has to put his hands to the left or to the right, become happy, and it causes rotation. And of course he has to counter that rotation by putting his hands the other way to slow it down and to stop it. And in order to stop, he has to put his palms in front of himself. So now he's got an ability to move around in zero gravity and to influence wormhole element. So playing with gravity in 0G in a vacuum in soul form, he could just make out the black ball, which was his wormhole exit point. And upon entering that, he'd wind up back in his chamber. So this describes how God existed and how he began to learn stuff. It is a story of survival and success in living in that environment and then making a better place to live. I am the Archangel Daniel, and I'm from heaven.